Thank you so much for being a part of this channel. I so appreciate your investment in this ministry, and it's definitely my honor and privilege to be able to pour back into you many of the things that I've learned and am learning and am helping teach churches like yours all across the United States and even in other countries around the world. Over the coming months and, Lord willing, years, I'm going to have the opportunity to drop some practical tips in your lap to do with what you will that have been tested and proven in helping churches grow, reaching people both digitally and especially in person. And one of my favorite areas of coaching and serving local churches is in the area of assimilation. And that is a big term that covers so many things, from websites to social media to the guest experience team. And so I want to zero in on some bite-sized tips that you can take and use today. And so I want to talk about greeters for a second, church greeters. These are some of the most wonderful people. And while the tips that I'll be giving both today and in the days to come will be very out of order, I know that they'll be simple and practical things that will genuinely benefit your church. And there's so much to be said about the office of the greeter. So much to be done, so much ministry happening, and often so much potential missed because of simple things that are misunderstood. As I was growing up, our church had the old-fashioned offering envelopes and the bulletins and the church sign with the words that changed, and nothing wrong with any of those things. I just remember the tagline being, "We're the friendliest church in town." And we prided ourselves in saying, we are the friendliest church in town. But upon a little further observation, it seemed odd to me that the friendliest church in town wasn't growing, at least anymore. It began as a large ministry that over the next 2 decades would shrink and shrink and shrink and shrink. And maybe we weren't so friendly. Maybe we weren't as friendly as we thought we were. Much to be said more about that in the future. But one thing that I noticed is when a new person would walk in, we would ask them questions like, "Are you new?" And that question is not beneficial. And I want to offer to you today a better question. But before I give it to you, it's important to understand why all other questions are failing. When a brand new guest walks into your auditorium, and it's important that we know that they are a guest. They're a guest of honor. We are privileged to be welcoming them into our assembly today. And I would often say as a pastor, you only get to come once as a guest, and after this, you're family. And it was our goal to help people feel that instantaneous bond and connection as we extended a hand of fellowship to them. But as people are walking in as our guest, we often ask questions like, "Is this your first time? Are you new? You're not from around here, are you? You're not from here. Have you been here before?" Things like that. And while from the bottom of our hearts, we mean them as genuine, sincere questions for these dear ones that we hope will connect to our congregation, at least in most cases. Some churches don't want anybody new to connect to their congregation. But while we mean those as genuine and sincere things, the way that the person receives them is altogether different. Consider this. Maybe your church has multiple services, or maybe you missed a Sunday because you were on vacation or out sick, and this person comes to a different service or came when you weren't there, or you've got an auditorium such or a ministry such that you can't meet everybody. You were serving in kids ministry on the Sunday they came. There are dozens of scenarios that present themselves for the reason why you haven't seen that person before, though they may have been attending for several weeks and in some cases several months. When you ask somebody, "Is this your first time? Are you new here?" You have communicated to them, "I don't know you," and maybe no one else does either. Well, John, that's pretty harsh. Yes, but it is 100% genuine. You have just decreased, even if only by a small percentile, the chances of that person returning, especially if they're not mature in the faith and they don't know yet what it means to be a part of the church. So when we say, "Are you new here?" and that person is put on the defensive to say, no, I've been here for a couple of months. You've just communicated, our church doesn't really know your name. And while others may have done this correctly, you have just hindered the efforts of building a relationship with them. Is this your first time? No, it's actually my third time. Oh, well, then what's your next step after that? You want to come to my life group? Actually, I'm already connected to a life group. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know you. I'm glad you're here. And it's just kind of an awkward exchange. Maybe not for you if you're just a without personal awareness extrovert, but for them, some major things are going on in their mind that they might not even be able to put their finger on, but you've just created an awkward moment. Is there a way to get around that? What if we could train all of our church greeters, in fact, all of our church body, to ask a better question? One that sets the conversation up for a natural next step that is going to help both the person asking and the one being asked this question. There is certainly one, and I want to give it to you today. Are you ready? Pens and pencils on standby, papers down, phone ready to take some notes as long as you're not watching the video on your phone. Ready? Here it is. How long have you been coming to this church? So how long have you been coming to Faith Church? How long have you been a part of Hope Church? You asking that question has just established a conversation that has a beautiful, simple, and an easy flow. Here it is. If it's their first time, they say, this is my first time actually. And you go, wow, I'm so glad that you're here. Did you happen to get the gift that we give all of our first time guests? No, I didn't. Let me get you a connection card and hey, why don't you come with me? And man, I'm so glad it's your first time. So how did you hear about us? Did you recently move to the area? You know, depending on how they answer that question, I found you on Facebook. That's so great. Hey, this might be a little awkward, but I'd love to be your friend on Facebook. I love Facebook. You know, I found you on Google. I just searched churches in my area. That's so great. If you don't mind my asking, what was it about this church that made you go, I'm going to go visit? And they may say, proximity to my house. You live close by? Oh man, you should come to our life group that meets close by. Or do your kids go to this school? Mine too. That's so awesome. Do you see how asking that question has set up the first time guest for some incredible conversation now with joy as you make them feel not just welcome, but wanted? More on welcome versus wanted in a coming video. But suppose that person has been attending your local assembly for multiple weeks or maybe even multiple months. How long have you been at Fortress Church? Well, we've been here for 3 months. That is so great. I'm sorry, I haven't got to meet you yet. I've actually been here for 2 years, but I've been on a rotation in the kids ministry. You've been here for a few months. Have you connected to a life group or, who have you been able to meet? Well, I know Bob and Jill over there. That's so great. I've known Bob for years. I'm gonna get on to Bob for not introducing me to you. I'm so glad that you're here. Hey, do you happen to be serving anywhere? No pressure. Just curious. Have you found a place to connect? No, but I've been wondering, like, actually, how do I get connected to that? Or, you know what? We're coming out of a season of some hurt. And so we're actually just here to really soak in for a few months. And, this church has been such a blessing to us in that way. Do you see how you now have a conversational next step, either to plug them into a team or to minister to them and maybe pray over them in that moment? It all happened because you asked the right question. There are a multiplicity of wrong ones, but there really is one primary right question to ask. How long have you been attending? How long have you been a part of? How long have you been coming to our church? And you've just established a conversation that will last longer than a "How are you? Fine. How are you? Fine." You've done some ministry here. The ministry of the church greeter is profound. They get to preach the sermon before the sermon. They get to literally be the hands and the feet of Jesus in that facility as they walk about, shaking them, fist bumping them, and serving those who they do not know. How long have you been coming to this church? And we've just opened the doors to a beautiful conversation that will lead us to some natural next steps. Thanks for joining me on this channel, and I can't wait for more church tips and tricks on assimilation and growth and how to do ministry that actually serves your community well. If you have any questions, if you're journeying through some shifts and some changes, feel free to comment those or send me an email to john@johnlgroves.com, and I would love to answer them and make some videos on these as well. It's my privilege to serve dozens of churches each year in coaching and consulting, and it's my privilege to serve you in answering your questions about how to reach your community effectively.